Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of conversations hosted by the Program on Forced Migration and Health at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. My name is Monette Zard, and I'm the director of the Program on Forced Migration and Health. So this year marks the 25th anniversary of the founding of our program in the Heilbronn Department of Population and Family Health. At the time of its founding, the program was one of the first academic programs of its kind to address the deficiencies in health service and health services provided in humanitarian response. 25 years on, we continue to champion a professionalized and critical approach to the delivery of humanitarian aid, and we're committed to educating the next generation of humanitarian leaders. Today, we're kicking off the first in a series of interviews with key players in this story and in the success and longevity of the program. And I'm delighted to have with us Dr. Carolyn Makinson, who was director of the Population and Forced Migration Program at the Mellon Foundation, which gave our program its very first grant, and Dr. Waldman, who was the first and founding director of the Program on Forced Migration and Health. So we're delighted to have them both with us to tell us about the early years of the program. And I think I will turn first to Ron. Ron, can you help us by painting a picture of what the state of the humanitarian field was like in the late 1990s, at the time the idea for this program was really being incubated and developed?
Well, thanks, Monette, for that very gracious introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Basically, at the time that the idea for this program was being developed in the late 1990s, I think that the humanitarian sector, and particularly the health sector within humanitarian intervention, had really reached its nadir, its lowest point. It had been a difficult decade, starting out with the debacle that was in Somalia. That's probably better known for its military side rather than its humanitarian side. And it continued through the Rwanda genocide of 1994. Many refugees, and I say many, which is not a particularly epidemiological term, but the fact that I have to say many really represents a failure of the epidemiologic community to determine the population that fled Rwanda and was settled close to the border within the Democratic Republic of Congo, which then was called Zaire, in a number of refugee camps. But let's say there were about 500,000 to 600,000 people, which is the best guess. In that population of 500,000 to 600,000 people, 45,000 people died in the space of 3 weeks from cholera. It was a major, what has come to be called by some, including myself, disaster following the disaster. The humanitarian intervention was as bad as it could get. As a result, the NGO community came together and said, well, we can't allow a repeat of this kind of performance. So there were these technical areas that needed to be developed, and we felt that there was a place then for a partnership between academia and the practitioner community. And thanks to Carolyn and the grant that she had made to the Mailman School and to Jim McCarthy, together with Alan Rosenfield, they were able to put together a program and asked me to come and direct it.
I'm going to turn to Carolyn next. Tell us how you viewed the field, sitting from your vantage point in philanthropy. What were you concerned about when you looked at the refugee and humanitarian field?
Well, I was really a stranger who blundered into this field. I didn't have a background in humanitarian work at all. I'm a demographer by training. And I was running the Mellon Foundation's population program. However, then I began to meet with humanitarian organizations, and I was curious about the field, and obviously I recognized the scale of the problem. Also, I talked to NGOs, and in the beginning, I would say that people tended to respond by saying that every humanitarian situation was so different that lessons learned might not be terribly important. But that really began to change for all the reasons that Ron explained. I was thinking about Goma as well. I said, look, I might be able to get 3 to 5 million a year. What would you use that for in this field if it became available? And everybody said, whatever you do, don't fund services. They said, we don't have enough money for our operations, but we'll never have enough money. But we have really urgent needs to build a knowledge base, basically, and develop training programs that we're never going to be able to get funded by the UN and government agencies. We were a foundation that largely operated in universities. And so it was just an amazing thing.
Ron, you're then recruited as the first director. Tell me, when you arrived, what did you identify as being the critical needs, both in terms of new and incoming students to the program, so the sort of education arm, but also on the research arm? Could you say a few words about that?
I didn't have an academic background. I came from the practitioner community, both at CDC, and then Alan Rosenfield approached me and asked if I would be interested in hearing about this position. And I came up to interview with Alan and with Jim, and everything worked out after that. But I didn't really know how to put together an academic program, an MPH program. I didn't, because you asked where were the students going to come from. I had no idea. Frankly. So we hired a few people who did have some experience in the area, administrative types of people, and they helped really put together the structure of the MPH together with other faculty that were more experienced than I was at the time. We got together a cohort, I think about 20 students in the first cohort that came on about a year after I took the position.
You've emphasized that link. You yourself are a practitioner, the link to practice, applied research. I'm interested in the history of the practicum experience for students. Was that something that was always integrated in the thinking around how the education program would work, the idea that students should be given exposure to what it means to work in the field?
Yes, it was always a conceptual element of the program. And I think, it had its growing pains, so I'm really glad to hear that it's well-grounded now.
So Carolyn, maybe coming back to you, as we're now on the 25th anniversary, as you reflect back, can you say a few words about, what you feel Mellon was able to achieve in this space, both at Mailman, and the program specifically, but also the other investments that you made at that time?
I would say, when you're a funder, the first thing you look for is, did your programs survive? I mean, once you were no longer funding them, are they still there? And I would say, yes, that obviously Columbia's program has been a great success. And I think all the other ones that we funded were also. And as you say, you then you run into people who've clearly mentioned during their experience that they've been part of something where you think, oh, wow, my goodness me, we funded that, 20 years ago, whatever. And when I was at the IRC Europe, I could really see, then I was in a way in a senior managerial position, but I could see the way that my staff, amongst others, drew on the outputs of some of these institutions that we'd helped get going.
So Ron, it was also an invitation to you perhaps to reflect back a little on the last 25 years, how far the sector has come, but also what you think the work ahead should pay attention to.
Madam Sadako Ogata always used to say that there are no humanitarian solutions to humanitarian problems. And I think that that's, as much as Carolyn has said that we should be looking at the bright side, the brighter side of things, I tend to be more pessimistic and cynical by nature. And I agree that the politics of the world has just changed the way we have to approach things and the way we do things. Armed conflict, and even now we have interstate armed conflict, which had been really declining for quite some time and seems to be posing a real danger again. There's another way of doing business that I would end on that's called the nexus, but it basically tries to say, okay, well, when we respond to emergencies, we should already be aware that when the emergency is over, there's going to need to be a major development effort in these countries. I think that it's a great concept conceptually, but I think it's fraught with difficulty and with pitfalls as well. So I think that really needs to be sorted out, and people need to be careful. Humanitarian, the word itself, is about focusing on affected people, not on the governments who put themselves up front to say we are the representatives of the people. So I think that the NGOs, their spirit is more working with populations, working with communities, working with local forces. That's what gives them their drive, their raison d'etre. And I think that pushing them into a political arena is it makes some sense for sure, but I'm not sure it's exactly the right way to go. I bring this up only to say that you ask about what things should be paid attention to in the future. And I think some of these kinds of processes do need tending. The outcomes that we want to achieve are clear and they are achievable. And I worry sometimes about some of these processes that, for me, fall more in the realm of political science and politics, sometimes get in the way of our ability to not only, as Carolyn put it so well, keep people alive, but to give them healthy and dignified lives as well.
Well, thank you, Ron. I mean, really just wanted to thank you and Carolyn for, sharing such a rich set of reflections, not just about the past, but about some of the challenges that I think we as a sector really need to be attuned to going forward. And I'm just very grateful to both of you for the work you've done in your careers, the work you put into developing this program, all of the students and faculty who have benefited and gone through this program, I'm sure would thank you in turn. And, to those of you who are watching, please stay tuned for the second in the series of conversations. You will be able to go to our website at publichealth.columbia.edu/PFMH25, both to find this recording, but also future recordings and other initiatives that we're going to be using to mark the 25th anniversary. So thank you to you both, and watch this space.